Hi, everyone, and welcome to Cyber Sensei, the definitive podcast for cybersecurity educators, brought to you by Cyberbit. My name is Sharon, Cyberbit CMO, and hi, Adam. Long time. Nice to
Hey,
see you.
John. Good to see
Hi
you
there.
too.
Good to see you too. And today we have a very, very special co-host. But before we introduce our hosts, just a couple of housekeeping reminders for our live audience. So obviously we are live. So for all of you who are here online, you're welcome to ask our hosts, any of us, any question in real time. We'll be answering questions in about 30 minutes. If you want to ask a question, just raise your hand and we will unmute you or type in your questions in the Q&A section at any time during this session, and we will address them during the Q&A. The session is being recorded and will be available on leading podcast platforms and on the Cyberbit YouTube page with video. And all the updates, as well as the link to the recording, will be published on Cyberbit's LinkedIn profile. And today we have a very special person with us, which I doubt that I need to introduce. Hello, Rick Howard.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure and an honor to have you here, Adam, and I will give you the honor of introducing Rick. Over to you.
Well, it's not hard to do a search on the internet and find a lot about Rick Howard as the Chief Security Officer at N2K, Chief Analyst, Senior Fellow. This is the organization was formerly CyberWire, one of the most popular podcasts, one of the most popular speakers in this cybersecurity space. I got to know Rick through another cyber group that meets typically on Wednesday evenings, which involves a little bit of alcohol, which is always good. Anyway, but in a past life as Chief Security Officer at Palo Alto and CISO at Task, I remember working when it was the Analytical Sciences Corporation. I don't know.
Yeah.
General Manager VeriSign. I mean, what an amazing background. But somebody we're all celebrating, days after our Memorial Day. Thank you for your service. It's over 25 years in the Army. Just such a distinguished career. So the audience can read more about that. I want to jump straight to what I think is one of the most important contributions you've made to the field of cybersecurity. And frankly, Rick, to me personally, as I've aspired to the role of being whatever the leader in the security function, and I lead both physical and cybersecurity for organizations, the advice for those that are trying to aspire to that role. And then you have this book where you have thought, you could tell how hard you thought about it, these first principles. What is a first principle? What are the 5 that you've come up with? How do you defend that? And now and then we'll close with this discussion with our audience. What do they do to help develop the next cyber warrior to have the earned insights? And so, Rick, I'd like to start off with that conversation. The audience is developing the next generation of cyber warrior. We hope and pray they aspire to be leaders. I'd like to ask, how do you define a leader, and what advice do you have for those men and women aspiring to be leader in cybersecurity and those developing those to be those leaders? Thanks, Rick.
It's such a great question. It's such a hard thing to answer, right? Because everybody talks about leadership, but you try to get people to pin it down. What is it actually? I view it as 2 things, right? One is to set the direction for the organization, being very clear about the direction the organization is heading, and then providing resources to the team so they can make it happen, right? And what gets confusing in all that is leaders like to get their hands in the mud and they try to take it over sometimes, and you have to trust your team that they will do the right things. In fact, it's the reason you hired that team, because you think they have the skill sets to move forward. So be clear in the direction, all right, and then provide the resources for them to make it all happen, I think. How do you do it? What's your definition?
Rick, I like the thing about being clear in your direction. One of the tests I use is, could I describe it to an 8th grader? Whatever it is I'm trying to do. The leader sets the strategy, and my definite strategy is a dialogue of alignment to achieve results with imperfect information and voluntarily constraining your options.
Yep.
But you used the word clear, and I want to double click on that a second, because it's hard to be clear with something that's seemingly complex. And, I use this phrase about mental models and first principles. Never could have put it as, I think, frankly, as clear and concise and verifiable as you did. Leaders have to be able to communicate clearly and in a way that makes the journey of their staff worthy of their extended commitment. So you came up with this concept to help develop leaders around using first principles. And I know a lot of us that come from a science and math background, we think we understand first principles. Would you define that for us and why you thought it was important to this field for aspiring leaders to understand how to think that way?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things there, right? First, I think InfoSec practitioners and professionals in general have difficulty understanding the difference between what a strategy is and what tactics are, right? And most of my career, my peers have talked about all the tactical things that we are doing. Vulnerability management, incident response. These are all things you do to support your program, but we've never really stopped for any moment of time to decide if we were going in the right direction in the first place. And I've been thinking about this for, geez, about 15 years. I started to get this prickly feeling in the back of my neck around 2010 or something, that we looked at what our predecessors had done and we've taken the next steps and we made our security practice better, but we haven't really thought, geez, is this the right way we should be doing that? Which got me thinking about first principles in science. You know, you look at anybody that solved any really complex problem, they get back to what is the essence of the problem. And I started to think about myself as, if you ask any InfoSec practitioner, any three of us in the room, and ask them what the purpose of their InfoSec program is, you're likely to get three different answers. And to me, that seems wrong. All right. We should be able to come up with the absolute cybersecurity first principle. Right. Now, tactically, how we pursue that goal will be different based on how big you are, based on what vertical you're in, right, based on what compliance laws you have to follow. But all of us should be heading in the same direction as the overall first principle. Does that make any sense?
I agree. And, we define first principles that this, my graduate degrees were in math and physics and stuff like that. But it's been so long ago, I have the illusion of knowledge that I remember. But, this basic proposition or assumption that can't be reduced, it can't be deducted, right, something else, anything, it can't be anything other than what it is. And so I start with that and I go, what a great way to think about. And if you're communicating with your executives and your staff and say, guys, I'm trying to get to the fundamental mental model, trying to fundamental way of thinking about this, I thought it was a beautiful place to start. So thank you as a gift to me. But then also you start to get this pattern of language with the executive team to get the resources, as you talked about, part of leaders to mobilize, set the direction, but also mobilize resources. So you spent 15 years, developing this. You're starting to coalesce around what is the first principle. First of all, did I define it the way you did? And then how did you go from that to what your 5 as opposed to 7 first principles would be?
Well, let's go back to what I think the absolute first principle is, right? Because like I said, if you ask anybody, you'll get lots of different answers.
Yeah.
Most of us will say something like the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability, right? But I make a pretty strong case in the book that doesn't cover all the bases, right? Other people will talk about frameworks like the NIST cybersecurity framework, and that's a good tool, okay? But it's mostly a checklist or a maturity model, which is fine. I'm not saying you shouldn't use it, but it doesn't get to the essence of the problem. And then other people will talk about, compliance regimes like, GDPR or, pick your, HIPAA or whatever that is. And those are requirements for the business. They don't actually get to the essence of the cybersecurity problem. All right. So I've been thinking about this for a long time and I've come up with what I think it is. Should I tell everybody what it is? It's a Twitter line. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. I believe it's this: reduce the probability of material impact due to a cyber event within, say, the next 3 to 5 years. And it sounds really simple when you say it fast, but it's really 3 pieces. The first part is reduce the probability, which means it implies that you can calculate the probability of material impact, which as an industry, we are not very good at. And we spend a lot of time in the book explaining how you might be able to do that. We can talk about that in a second. So that's the first part: reduce the probability. The second part is of material impact, meaning not everything in your organization is material. In fact, I would say most of it isn't. What you're trying to focus on is the things that keep the business running, right? And so you as a security leader need to understand what that is for the business. That means you're interacting with the leaders of the company so they can tell you what they think it is, so you can come up with that framework. So that's the second part. And then the third part is time bounded. I say 3 years, it could be 5 years, it could be 1 year, whatever makes sense to your organization. The point is the probability of material impact 100 years in the future is going to be different than if you're trying to calculate it, say, for the next 3 years, right? So it makes it a more realistic problem. So that's it. Reduce the probability of material impact due to a cyber event in the next, say, 3 to 5 years.
Couldn't agree more. And what I like about the three parts of this is, and like the struggle I had coming from a math and engineering and aerospace engineering background, my mental model was I obsess about the math, I worry about the inputs, and I'm going to get the same output every time. It's a deterministic model.
Right.
But this is a probabilistic model.
Yeah.
And
And
thinking in
people have
terms
trouble with that, right? People have trouble thinking in terms of probabilities. But in fact, the real world is all about
all of that.
probabilities,
The
right?
Bayesian
Yeah, exactly.
So, but
So-
what's interesting, and what I'm kind of puzzled is, so how do you, I mean, that requires you to measure probability of material impact. So, and is that something that organizations are doing today, or does that mean, okay, first thing I need to go out and start defining the infrastructure or the metrics, or how do we even measure that?
Yeah, and we've struggled with it, and I've struggled with it in my career, right? The typical move for somebody like me is to build a qualitative heat map, right? You guys are familiar with heat maps, right?
Yeah.
Everything on the x-axis is all the things that can go wrong, and on the y-axis is how bad it's going to be when they do go wrong. So what happens is all the really scary things float high and to the right, and all the less scary things float low and to the left. And if you're good at, color coding spreadsheets, the really high and to the right stuff is red, the middle stuff is yellow, and the benign stuff is green. That's why it's called a heat map. But it turns out there's reams of science that prove that qualitative heat maps are bad science. It doesn't get you to the result. And the thing I hate about them is what I've usually done is gone to my boss and say, see all these things in the top right corner and highlighted in red? That's really scary. Give me $1 bazillion to fix it. Right. And sometimes that worked for me and sometimes it didn't, but it never gave the leaders a chance to evaluate whether or not it was in their risk tolerance. The business is full of all kinds of risks, and cyber is just one of them. Some executive might say, well, it's a 20% chance we're going to be materially impacted next year. I'll accept that risk because I have other risks that are much higher than that. And I'm going to go focus on those. On the other hand, you might have a business leader who says, oh my God, 20%. I need you to reduce that down to say 10%. Then somebody like us can come to them and say, oh, here are some things we can do in terms of people, process, and technology that will bring it down. It's going to cost you some money, but we can actually do that. The leaders can make decisions with that kind of information.
And
I
how
like
much
that
is,
Sorry,
yeah, I don't know. Go ahead.
I like that because speaking the pattern, speaking a common lingua franca with the executives, like my definition of strategy, a dialogue of alignment, we're using the same terms and they mean the same thing. Nouns matter. The first thing children do is define a noun. And yet sometimes we can't define our terms with each other. And then you have that dialogue of alignment. And what I've tried to, and what I wanted to explore with you is that sometimes you don't have to have it exactly measured, but as Einstein said, it's all relative. I can show you relative to what it is today, the risk has been reduced. And then,
well, I think that's our fundamental misunderstanding of what probability is. Most of us, when I took my probability and stats course in college, probability and stats 101, I barely got through that by the skin of my teeth, right? And we mostly counted colored marbles coming out of urns and trying to calculate the probability. And that is one sliver of what probability is. What it is mostly, though, is a measure of uncertainty. Right. So it doesn't have to be precise. It has to be precise enough to make business decisions with. And that was my big epiphany when I was writing the book. Because, before I would go try to count all the things and try to figure out what the risk is. And that's really too hard. But if you can get your head behind the idea of uncertainty, then you can use that to make decisions with.
So here's a question. How much we're in the realm of simulation and so on. How much can that improve your ability to project that probability? I mean, eventually, if you want to know if the probability is high or low, how about simulating the potential scenario and then kind of measuring success, or instead of guesswork, actually trying to simulate that? Is that something that can help you actually predict the probability?
You can use it as an input, right? But let me explain what I mean by that. It won't be the only thing you use to calculate the probability. It will be a way to adjust the forecast as you go. The book that convinced me that this was possible is a book by Dr. Tetlock called Super Forecasting. And Dr. Tetlock is this, kind of a old curmudgeon kind of a guy, and he works for the US IARPA department. That's the Intelligence Advanced Research Project, right? And in the early 2000s, he was watching the news programs here in the States, CNN and Fox and MSNBC, and he would watch them bring these pundits on the panel. A person who guessed something right once in their career, but they'd been wrong ever since, So he would shake his fist at the TV and say, why do they bring these guys on? And I always thought there should be like a chyron at the bottom of the screen that said, this guy's 1 for 37. Maybe don't pay any attention to what he's talking about, right? So anyway, he does an experiment with 3 groups, right? The intelligence community, the academic community, and a group I call the geezers on the go. These are people that had time to solve puzzles. And he gave them 500 really difficult problems to forecast. Like, what's the probability that the Syrian president will be assassinated next year, right? And then he graded it over time, right? And I guess I buried the lead here, but the geezers on the go are the ones that win that contest by 60%. They beat the academic community who had access to classified information by 60%, right? But there was a subset in the geezers, the super forecasters, who beat their group by another 60%, right? And the way they did it is a combination of Bayes' algorithm and Fermi estimates. They would make an estimate about things happening. They would look at evidence and adjust their forecast up or down based on that new evidence. And they would repeat that over and over again, right? And so I said, if they can do that for those really tough forecasting problems, surely a bunch of InfoSec security professionals like me can do that for cybersecurity risk. So to answer your question, right, that could be one of the inputs. You could simulate a response to, let's say, Wicked Spider and see how well your organization does. And then, oh, I did well there. Let me adjust my forecast down because clearly I'm pretty good at that. Or on the other hand, if you completely failed that, you say, ooh, I need to uptick my forecast because I'm not as good as I thought I was. So yes, you can absolutely use it as an input.
So we've got, and the topic is from boardroom to leadership. And I think we have a group of educators here. We have a group of industry leaders. And I'm wondering maybe if we want to address the educators in the room, how can your theory maybe help them grow the next CISO, the next cybersecurity leaders? Because we're thinking a lot about education as we're teaching the entry level or creating the next entry level folks. But what are your thoughts about being able to generate the next leaders, maybe coming back to the higher education institutions and growing the next leaders? What should the educators be thinking about? And how does that connect to your theory?
Well, one tactical thing I would like to throw out, because usually when you hear about cybersecurity leaders, you expect them to be very technical. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think the number one skill for any leader, but especially a cybersecurity leader, is being able to communicate what you know to some really smart people who don't understand your problem domain, right? And so what does that mean? It means that you need to practice communicating. That is writing and speaking, right? And whenever I have newbies come up to me and ask how they can break into the cybersecurity field, I always give them a homework assignment, right? And say, take a famous cybersecurity paper like, the Lockheed Martin kill chain paper. It's about 20 pages, not that technical, right? And if you can summarize that in half a page so that your grandma can understand what it is, then you have a role here in the cybersecurity space and you can be a leader because you can explain these really complex things to business leaders.
Yeah, because in the boardroom, those are the folks eventually that you'll be speaking with, and I think that's a bit overlooked. Yeah. By the way, I want to just stop and tell the audience that if you want to ask any questions, Cyberbit will be buying and sending our most engaged attendee a copy of your book, Rick. So
awesome.
That will be, so I encourage you to ask questions, and you will get a free copy of Cybersecurity First Principles, a reboot of strategy and tactics, as a gift from Cyberbit. So feel free to type in your questions.
I appreciate you are providing that. So, you know, I need to send my kids to college. All right. So,
Our pleasure. All right, Adam, over to you.
I'm just glad all four of my kids are out of college, but no boomerangs either. So big win there. We talked about being a leader and be able to communicate clearly using a common lingua franca with the executives, being able to engage in that dialogue. And now we go all the way down to you have 5 first principles. I'd like to ask if you would summarize each of those. And as you do, Rick, the audience and those who will listen to this later, their educators are like, well, how would I weave that into my curriculum? How would I help my students understand the real profound nature of zero trust and intrusion? So go through the 5, if you would, and how they could help develop their students, why this is important to them.
yeah, and let me make a distinction here too, right? I say the absolute cybersecurity first principle is reduce the probability of material impact.
Yeah.
What I then talk about though is here, if you take that as truth, right, and we can debate whether or not I nailed it or not, but let's say you just assume that I got it right. These are follow-on strategies that will help you, right? And I'm not saying that you have to do all of them, right? I'm saying these are ones you might choose if you're believing this first principle idea, right? And so the first one that you mentioned is zero trust. It is a passive strategy, I say in the book, because it really has nothing to do with defeating the adversary at all. It's really locking down everything as much as possible so that adversaries can't find a weakness in your infrastructure. All right. So zero trust is a idea. It is a journey. It is a set of ideas that you're trying to implement. So that's how you should think about it. So it's a strategy, and then there are several tactics that I talk about in the book that will help you deploy that strategy. Right. The second one is intrusion kill chain prevention. That's more of an active strategy, meaning we know that there are a number of bad guys in the world. If you are tracking the MITRE ATT&CK framework, that organization in their wiki, they're tracking some 150 nation state activity, adversary campaigns across the kill chain. Meaning that the adversary has to do a number of things right in order to be successful. Sometimes that's 30 or 40 things. Sometimes it's 500 things, depending on how technical it is. And the point is that we know most of this already, right? There's 150 of them. So if you're going to pursue that strategy, why wouldn't you put prevention controls in place for all the known things that the adversaries do, right? So that is another strategy you can do. The third one is resilience. I work at a little startup called N2K. You know, we have 40 people. There's 2 IT guys. The security team is me, and I'm not allowed to touch anything because I'll break it. All right. So it's a different perspective. We don't have the resources to pursue zero trust or intrusion kill chain. We barely have enough money, to have a coffee pot running. So our strategy is resilience, meaning we're going to not prevent anything. We're going to survive it, right? That means we are putting
non-material.
Right. Okay. We're going to make sure that backups are good, encryption is good, and and make sure we are back up and running and keeping the business running after the thing has happened. Right. The fourth strategy is forecasting. We spend a lot of time in the book talking about how to think about risk forecasting, because you have to be able to do that in order to pursue the ultimate first principle. And the last one is automation, right? Because if you are still spending time manually configuring things, you're going to screw that up, right? And we should really embrace the idea of automation and DevSecOps as a tactic in order to deploy all the things that you're going to try to deploy. So I don't know, did I cover what I needed to cover there?
I do, and I'd like to kind of go in reverse order. Automation, students in these programs, you're going to automate using Python or PowerShell and some other scripts and regex and some other platforms and stuff. So you need to learn how to write code, but you also need to learn how to use some of the new artificial intelligence, but then understand its strengths and its weaknesses. So there's some depth there as a skill to learn during school.
Yeah, and I would say learn how to plug into the DevOps platforms that your organization is using. 10 years ago, I thought that when DevOps started to really get popular, that security people would switch from what they are now, which is practitioners first, and then maybe they might write some script code. I thought it was going to switch and that we would be mostly developers that understand security. That has not happened. The security field has largely shunned the whole DevOps kind of thing and left it to the IT guys to make all that happen. So for the future organizations, I would say build those bridges, okay, to the DevOps environments.
Awesome. And then in risk forecasting, I have to say, I have never seen this in an entry-level cyber program before, but the way you describe in the program, I could see it being an integral part of the framework of a framework of a cybersecurity program, of which cyber management is risk management. It's like inherent. But I've struggled with how to teach that, and I've also struggled with how to put it into practice. Love it if you double click on risk forecasting for me.
Yeah, like I said, super forecasting, the book is what got me convinced that this is the right path, right? And I read all the other risk forecasting books, right? The How to Measure Everything in Cybersecurity by Hubbard and Seierson, the FAIR methodology by Jones and Freund. Okay, those are great primers or primers on how to think about changing your thought process on calculating probability. And I've interviewed all those guys for my podcast. Both of those books are cybersecurity canon Hall of Fame books that I'm involved with. So I've known these guys forever. They're friends of mine. But I've told this to their faces, right? I said, listen, it's a great primer, but I kept waiting for the chapter at the end of the book on both those books.
How to do it.
It said, yeah, how do you do this in the real world? All right. So, and that chapter isn't there. So when I wrote my book, I wrote it, this is how I would do it for my organization. All right. And so, yeah, I have large debates with those four folks about how to do this.
Well, especially in this world where like there's no reason not to know something because it's out there using the tools and stuff. And one of my mottos is to shamelessly steal the best of what others have already mastered.
Yeah.
And so I liked your chapter on this and I like that, but I wish that, I do wish, is the benefit of this conversation, is I could do a better job of explaining to my students, this information is there. Where would you go find it? How could you leverage it? And I'm trying to leverage things like external, data from the industry. But if you don't understand basic statistics, it is very easy to misuse that data. My classic one is they say it's $4.45 million per breach average.
Yeah.
Well, a long tail experiment average is completely useless. Not completely, but it'd be a little bit, but largely irrelevant to most organizations. And then you say, what are the most probable techniques? And what I like about this podcast and what we're trying to do with educators is you have a chance, like in your next one of resilience, you have a chance to assess your resilience. You know what the most probabilistic, you know what the most common techniques are. You have a chance to look, is your organization trained against those? Because your OODA loop, right? If you can stop it at the 34th of 43, big win, all good. No, not all good, but you know what I mean? You've reduced the probability. I don't think a lot of educators and I think a lot of students coming out of these programs understand that. Where is, like I could ask for resources from our executive team and tell my body is room temperature. It's still not going to happen. So I have to learn how to leverage and have that critical thought process. And I see the younger staff, and I teach cybersecurity programs, and I've watched those that got promoted pretty quickly. They got hands-on in cyber ranges. They kept their critical thinking maturing. And when they had an opportunity 6, 9 months, a year later, and their boss had said, have you thought about it this way? And they go, I like the way you think. I like the way you make me feel confident. It's probabilistic. We're speaking the same language now. So I wish I had done a better job of those sources. And when you look at the data to do better risk forecasting, I think you have, like, there's the black swan, Bayesian, you've got the Fermi, double click on where you think young students might get a little bit of a taste to do risk forecasting.
Well, from the super forecasting book, the way the super forecasters do it is it's two problems. One is an outside in forecast and the other is an inside out. The outside in is just looking at the general data for your industry. And there's plenty of reports out there you can use to get a baseline for whatever your organization is to say, in fact, I'll point you to one. The Scientia folks do public reports that do this very nicely. You don't even have to do that much work. You can see that for your vertical, like mine, I'm in a communications vertical. And for startups, the probability that anybody's going to hit me with a ransomware attack is really small.
Me too.
really small. Okay. So, maybe don't have to worry about that too much. But if you're a Fortune 500 company, if you're a financial in a Fortune 500 company, that probability goes way, way up. Right. And those numbers are available to anybody. You don't even have to do the calculations. Other people are
Exactly
doing
what I
those
do.
already. Right. So that's your baseline number. Right. So from that starting point, now you can start iterating with the Bayes algorithm idea, right? And the idea of Bayes, you don't have to do high-end math to do this, but here's essentially what the Bayes algorithm is. You make an initial forecast, and then you collect more information about the domain, and you adjust the forecast up or down based on that new information, and you just iterate over time, okay? And you do that over and over again. So when you start with an outside-in forecast and get your initial number, now you can start looking at more information about your internal system. That's the inside-out organization. And whatever strategies you are pursuing, whether it's zero trust or intrusion kill chain prevention or resilience or automation, you can evaluate how well you are doing, okay, and adjust the forecast up or down from there. And if you throw in a simulation, you can actually say, for this particular scenario, I'm really good at this or I'm really bad at this. Let me adjust my forecast up or down. Let me say one more thing about this. Here in the United States, the SEC adopted a new rule that says that public companies need to disclose material cyber events within 4 days of discovery, right? And that's a really interesting idea. That has made all of us run to our CFOs to figure out how do we do that? What is material for the organization? And what I've observed is that for the finance people, this SEC people, the Securities and Exchange Commission people, they already have an accepted list of first principles. They call them the GAAP rules, the generally accepted accounting principles. It's about 90 rules that they all use to present the business to the public. But when they come to us, the cybersecurity professionals, we give them the NIST framework or the CIA, which there's no connection point there.
None. It's no material.
Right. So what we need to be able to do is say, we think the probability of material impact is 20%. And maybe the SEC might want to mandate that that's the thing that all public companies have to broadcast. We'll see. That's a little naive to say that, but that's what I'd love to see in the future.
You talked about the outside. Oh, sorry, Sharon.
Yeah, we're starting to get some questions, so that's great. So thanks for starting to send them in. But I have a question that comes up when I hear you. Even as an educator or as a leader, would it make sense, or is it possible to grow a CISO in-house in the organization, or is that really someone you just need to hire from the outside? Or can you identify the potential CISO in-house and grow that person? Is that something that you believe that is doable, or is it really someone that needs to go out and learn something? Or what's the best way to produce this new boardroom level CISO?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to think about that, right? When do you hire a CISO? The first case is after you've already been breached and you're looking to have someone come shore stuff up. So in that case, what has usually happened is they go out to people who are already CISOs and bring someone in. So that's one scenario. The second scenario, though, is when an organization realizes they needed to improve their InfoSec program before anything bad happens. You can absolutely grow that person, right? Being a CISO is not rocket science. Clearly, if I can be a CISO, anybody can do this, right? And so you can actually absolutely train them, all right? So yes, I think it's possible.
And what is that training, or do you want to find someone with a certain background or certain characteristics, and what would be that training if you do that in-house?
That's a really interesting question, right? I believe it's aptitude. It's not engineering. It's not I don't know, pick 7 other criteria, right?
Yeah.
But it is, I need this person to be able to come in and have a hunger to learn how things work and to learn how to describe that to the business, right? And here in my 30 years, we don't get mentors from the business class people to help with that. I would love to see that change in the future, where the CEO recognizes that there is a problem and that they're going to train this new person, this new potential CISO, on how to think like a business leader in terms of cybersecurity.
That's great. I mean, business leadership, communication. I'm not sure we're thinking that way right now.
I don't
Yeah.
think we are either. You know, if you think about it, we got the first CIOs in 1985. I think it was an airline that did it. We didn't get the first CISO until 10 years later. Okay, it was a bank that did it. All right, but what happened is we started promoting the techies in the organization into these CISO roles, and they would come into the board and talk about all these technical things like malware and vulnerabilities and exploits, and the board guys go, I don't want to talk to that guy. And so we buried them inside the IT organization, right? No one decided that we needed to mentor them to be business leaders, and I would like to see that changed.
So, Adam,
think
should we present the questions from the
Yeah.
audience, or do you want to?
Well, let me ask if I could ask Rick to come back to one thing. You talked about on the super forecasting, there's outside in, but then we missed going the inside out. We had Roger Grimes on our podcast a few months back where he talked about the data-driven program. Could you spend just a few minutes on that and let's go to the questions?
Yeah, so like if you inside out would be take your chosen strategy. Let's say you chose zero trust, right? In the book, I think I identify some 15 tactical things that you can do to pursue the zero trust strategy. And it's pretty easy to evaluate how good you are at each of those tactics, right? For example, you have a well deployed identity and access management system, right? And if you do, then you did well for your zero trust program. You can actually reduce the forecast a little bit. But if you don't even have that, then no, okay, you don't have a good zero trust program. And just the way I am telling you, it can be that easy on the first round of this. Get your team in a room and say, we think we need to do these 15 things. How good are we at that? And make a guess on how that affects the forecast. You can get more precise later on, but that'd be the first go around to do that. And you can do that for every strategy that you were trying to pursue.
I like that. One of the things that we did in addition to looking at those was we said, what is the data telling us of how people actually got in today? Where did they get in?
Yeah.
And where's the biggest bang for our buck? And sadly, USB sticks was pretty high on the list. But that's for another conversation.
That's another conversation.
Sharon, the question, sir.
Yeah, so we got a question from Chuck, who seems to be an educator. Says, hi, Rick, I teach the CISO program, and I start all my courses by asking the student, what is your organization's mission statement? From there, we go into how are you enabling or adding security? By the way, I'm reading the question now. I didn't read it yet, so I'm discovering as I read. From there, we go into how are you enabling or adding security and making that happen? Strategy and then tactics to make it happen. Seems similar to what you're saying. And he mentioned that he met you some time ago when he was in the Fed space and admires your strategy. The question is there a best delivery method for global delivery to security staff, or is each challenge different? What if you used? Do you understand the question? I'm not sure. The best
I
delivery.
get it. Yeah.
Okay.
First, hi, Chuck. Good to see you again. All right. And I'm reading through your question list. You're right that materiality is different for everybody, right? And it's based on culture. It's based on leadership. It's based on tolerance for risk, right? And so those are conversations before you can do this calculation that you got to have with the executive staff and the board members. You have to really understand that at a deep level before you can help challenge that. But you are exactly right, okay, what is the mission of the company, right? From there, you can start thinking, well, if the mission is this, then material things are X, Y, and Z. The security professional can then go in and say, if X, Y, and Z are the material things, here's the probability that we're going to lose some money there because of our current InfoSec architecture, right? And so I don't know if I answered the question, but I think that's what you're asking.
Yeah, so I hope that answers the question. And Chuck was also interested in learning more about super forecasting. So what's the best path for that?
I would start with the book. The book's excellent, right? It's really fun to read, and he's a good storyteller, good writer. It's called Super Forecasting, and you can get it on Amazon.
All right, and we'll let you know if more questions come up. So, sure, Adam. Before maybe I have actually a question. So we talked about reducing the probability of a material breach or material attack, and how much do you think practice can actually help that? Because we're talking to quite a lot of cybersecurity leaders, and I think they're not talking about probability, but they are, especially obviously in public companies, very concerned of all the aspects of a material breach and the exposure and the disclosure and so on. And they're talking a lot about how do I reduce that probability, and how much do you see that practice can reduce the small malware or small phishing attack becoming a material breach? Do you think it's helpful?
Are you asking me or?
Yes, I'm asking you if you feel that practice is something that can actually help in that sense.
I do think that, right? If you look at the very public commercial breaches, you can point to incidents where the leadership team mishandled the communications of everything, right? Which caused them to spend way more money than it would if they would have handled it properly. So you can do a simulation and run your team through the incident response process all the way from technical discovery up to the top where the CEO and the board members are talking about the event in the public, right? Just to get the gears rolling so that we know what we're doing. If you handle that properly, you can absolutely reduce the probability of material impact. If you go into it willy-nilly, some of the worst examples are people that were just making it up as they were going. They were changing their mind every time they got out in public. They didn't have a plan. They just kind of went for it. And man, some of those are disasters.
This is interesting. So you're putting a spotlight on communications and kind of going from the incident response team all the way to the CEO.
Yeah.
Basically. So, and is that where you feel a lot of the challenges are? I mean, solving this gap between the tech team and the exec team is kind of something that you see a lot as a challenge in those incidents. Is that?
I see that as that's where that breaks down, right? And in some organizations, the tech team is really good and they've done everything they could possibly do to fend off the attack. But as it's elevated through the crisis plan, the executives stumble about how to describe what's going on, right? And so you can absolutely use simulations to do things like that. To practice, you have to have a mindset. It's never going to, in the real world, it's never going to go the way you thought it was going to go, all right? But you have to have a purpose in mind before you start so you can hit all the targets.
Yeah, but that's a great point. I mean, you kind of like what you know, you're doing this tech team is doing their own thing and the executive is doing their own tabletops. How much are they actually doing this together? Probably not much.
Probably not much. And it's so easy to do, by the way. You can, it doesn't have to be some elaborate thing,
Yeah.
right? It really doesn't. For people on a low budget, I used to do them at lunch and learns. Okay. We'd bring all the executives in because even executives like to get a free lunch. You put a free sandwich in front of them, they're going to come. Right. And, you throw a scenario on the table and you run them through the playbook. Right. You learn something new every single time. Okay. Yeah. And then it helps clarify what the leaders should be thinking about as they go through the process.
Hey, Rick, I'm about to embarrass myself because it's something I'm really good at. I want to do a thought exercise with you. This is a real world scenario that literally about an hour to 2 hours from now, I'm going to be presenting what I'm about to say to my client.
Okay.
So
I'm sorry already, but go ahead.
Yeah, brave here. So this is a client that is spending, several $100,000 a year on email gateway solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked me to evaluate the next generation of solutions. So I looked at the usual cast, Mimecast, Proofpoint, Abnormal, Microsoft 365 with Defender and blah, blah, blah. And I looked, then I said, but hold it, share with me the data of what is getting through your social engineering, business email compromise attack and stuff like that. And then I looked at the outside in data from the various solutions and I said, there's only about a 1.5 to 2% catch rate on the malware and the social engineering account compromise and account takeover. I'm going to rush through this, but because I know you know this really, really well. And then I said, but hold it, you have a world-class managed security service provider. What's the probability that it gets through their next layers of protection, their prophylaxis, in this case, world-class EDR, EDM tools, world-class SIEM capabilities,
Yeah.
lots of automation, lots of AI in that layer. And I'm like, it's pretty close to zero,
Yeah.
especially for that 1.5 or 2%, which were shown to get through. And I said, if I were you, I would turn your email gateway solutions off, the one that was in addition to their E5 license, and save the money.
Yeah.
It's not showing to materially reduce the risk. And I'm trying to have that conversation. Well, I will have that conversation in a couple hours. Seriously, what is flawed in my thinking? What might I be missing?
I think you're right on. There's an excellent book called Cyber Defense Matrix.
I have
that,
it.
Yeah.
I love that book.
That talks about,
it's a good read. It's not
it's
a
a good read.
book.
I would say it's mostly for, Fortune big companies, all right, because small companies don't have all the resources there. But what the author tries to do is say, here are all the things you can do. Here's all the things that you might do inside the NIST cybersecurity framework, let's say. And it helps them identify, here's all the tools for prevention. Here's all the tools for identification. And you know what? There might be some overlap there, right? And because you're a Fortune 500 company, all right, you may have the money that you can have duplicate tools, but if you're like a startup like me, I can barely afford any of them, right? And so what you're saying is absolutely true. Why do you have two different tools doing the same thing, especially when the first one is really good, right? Maybe spend that money somewhere else. That's
And you
one
have the
way.
next layer of protection anyway.
Yeah, exactly right.
Probability getting through that was really quite small. For the malware that did get through,
Yeah.
it's anyway. Well, thank you for that. And we have a question here. Saron, you want to?
Yeah, sure. There's a couple. Here's one for someone anonymous. Interesting question. What do you think about quantum mathematics' role in the cybersecurity industry? Will it speed up the simulation process soon enough? Thank you, Abe. Question from
No,
Abe.
there's like 7 questions in that one question,
Yeah.
right? So let's talk about first, quantum math will absolutely, when it gets here, and we can debate how long it's going to take to get here, all right? But when it gets here, it's going to destroy anything you've encrypted in the old regime, right? Because it'll just be able to work through it as quickly as possible, right? So I'm not as worried about that problem as other people are. There are very specific verticals that should be worried about it, say governments and things like that. But for the most world, if they figure quantum encryption out tomorrow, it's not going to be that big of a deal for most of us out there. I don't know. You guys tell me if you think that's wrong. The second question, though, is will quantum help the simulation space? I will defer to you guys. I haven't really thought about it that much. What do you think about that?
I mean, I'm sure it will, but Adam, you're the mathematician in the room, so or the physician, so physicist, not physician. But what do you think?
It's a tough one to answer, but I'm not sure it's the right question to be asking about the use of quantum. In the case that I think about, rather than simulation, about the ability to encrypt and decrypt symmetric and asymmetric traffic, what is the role of PKI in the future when you have this? That I think is the more relevant question about how to use quantum in a world where it's an arms race against primarily the encryption side. I don't think the simulation side is going to be as relevant in the areas of where quantum is going to play relative to the. But by then, and Breck, I'm with you. I'm like, this is, when will it get here? And the race, when we get to the true generative AI solutions that are in the general category, not the large language models, but the ones that have gone to the next level, like ChatGPT-5 or whatever that, OpenAI is, its ability to connect the dots and spatially reason about how is the attacker thinking, what defense do you have in place, and then model that in I call it in a spatially aware scenario, like what is actually being used in the wild and what actually do you have in place and how do you think about this? I think that's going to be the more interesting question that's going to happen really quite quickly. I literally think later this year, if not early next year.
I would also bring it back through the prism of the absolute first principle, right? If you have data that's encrypted and then quantum happens, all right, how much of that data is going to be material to you if someone exposes all of that? Likely it's going to be, you don't have any of that data for most organizations, right? But if you do, then, you should be pursuing the new algorithms that the NSA has been talking about. But that is a real niche part of the InfoSec space, I think.
I think so too.
And we're seeing two more interesting questions. One is from Chuck again. When we do the after action report, the AAR from an event, Chuck says, I would like to invite the audit person of the impacted system to join the session. And what do you think
Yeah.
are the value of that, of inviting the audit person into the after action report?
I would absolutely bring them in. Okay. It shows them your process, that you're serious about it. So bring them in. I would also bring in, if you're in the United States, your local FBI rep, right? Because they're going to be able to help you when it actually does hit the fan, and whatever your equivalent is in whatever country you're in. All right, bring in your law enforcement advisor so they can see what you're doing, and they can see before it actually happens how they might help you in the real crisis. So absolutely, more the better, I think.
Yeah, this is interesting question from Chuck here. I think this is a deceptively savvy question. First of all, it's different if it's an event versus an incident. I'm going to assume he meant an incident. It's not just another event, a true incident. In this case, like I have a tool that a template that I actually give my internal audit team of how to do the evaluation with us. I'm asking them to look at the psychographic profile, the energy level of the team, the confusion, because when really, really bad things happen, it's like physically, it's like large motor motion stuff is working. The fine motor skills you think are going to work when you're getting shot at doesn't work. And then I'm asking, what did you see in our communication pattern? And then what did you see in our discipline and the ability to follow through our critical reasoning so we can automate, define the process such that we can use our human cognition for the things that we didn't need or weren't smart enough to think about when we created our TTPs or whatever it is. And that's where I find that independent advisor who thinks in that kind of way supremely of value to the team, because they dispassionately evaluate. Yes, you guys were or were not communicating, electronically, synchronously, asynchronously, knowledge base. And then they're looking at our psychographic profile. Like, I saw you guys get automated. And when you did from your, like, I'm a big fan of the 5 factors rather model for psychographic. You tended to go back to your agreeableness, your openness, your conscientiousness, your neuroticism of overthinking it. I was like, oh. And as Elizabeth King says, what's the process that saves me from the poverty of my attentions? Because I have them. Anyway, Chuck, rather, great question.
Yeah, good question.
We've got the classic question from Alon. I was surprised nobody asked about AI so far, but we can have a complete session on that. But a very general question on professional opinion on how advancements in AI and machine learning are being utilized in cybersecurity by defenders and by attackers. So I actually have an interesting anecdote, and I'll let you guys, of course, have a lot to say about that. But interestingly, today I ran into an AI program that helps you get through technical interviews. So actually, when you're applying for a job, you can actually use AI to answer technical questions in an interview, which is kind of like the last line of, you're interviewing for a cybersecurity job, and you're actually using AI in the Zoom interview to cheat through your interview. And I think this is probably the ultimate use of AI that I've just seen. Obviously used by attackers, as you'll probably want to mention later on. And on the defense side, for sure, from our perspective, when we deal with simulating attacks in order to have our customers or our users prepare or upskill or exercise in live fire simulation, AI is a major technology or major tactic that we use in order to simulate those attacks. And it gives us a lot of interesting ways to actually emulate real world attacks. So that's certainly something that improves our ability to prepare for an attack. But I'd love to hear from you guys on other ways defenders can use AI or attackers.
Well, I'm glad we got the question, because, it's a law here in the States that you can't have a cybersecurity podcast unless you talk about AI.
Yeah,
all right. So
exactly.
we've checked that box.
Doesn't say we have to be truthful. It just says
just we have to talk about it. All right.
Yeah.
I think in the cybersecurity space, there's 2 different areas that we should be looking at. One that I think we're going to get lots of benefit from is how to configure your tool set using machine learning, large language models. So these things can get very complex. Let's just say you're a customer of, I don't know, Cisco, and you buy all their products. Having a large learning model looking at your configurations and making suggestions about what you should be turning on and what you should be turning off, I think that has really short-term benefits to the entire space. The second part is harder. Okay, how do you use machine learning algorithms to defend better in real time, or to find bad guys in your space that you didn't know were there? And these aren't new ideas. In my last job, I worked as the CISO for Palo Alto Networks. This is 2016. We were doing machine learning algorithms on XDR data, basically collecting all the data on everything. And the idea was that we were just going to throw it into some big data lake and it would find bad guys. It never did. Okay. It never found the next, wicked spider. It found anomalies, things we needed to go check, but it never found a new adversary or something that was actionable right then. Right. And so that's 2016. So where we are, it's 8 years now. And I can't point to a single instance where machine learning has done that kind of a thing. I think it's around the corner. I think we're going to learn how to do that, but I don't think we're there yet. I do like the simulation idea, okay, that you can train a machine learning algorithm to emulate wicked spider or panda bear. That is absolutely possible, and I bet we'll see more and more of that in the near term. I don't know. What do you guys think?
We're on it. Yeah, no, for sure. It's happening. It's happening. Adam, any final questions?
I was just going to say,
before we
I
conclude?
really appreciate this opportunity to have this conversation. On the AI side, I think it is for everybody to be playing with this. It's not just an IT or cybersecurity thing.
Yeah.
And my advice to people is look at both the prompt engineering courses. There's some pretty good ones out there, as well as the prompt conversational engineering courses. You get different models looking at different things and their different perspectives. I think it is going to be an arms race pretty soon. And so I am one of those that I think we have to be in that. If you look at that Kuhnefen model about sensing for complex versus complicated, we're in that probe, sense and respond in this case. And in your AI, treat it like it's a really, really smart intern. Don't give it the secret stuff, but it's really, really good. But you still own the responsibility for
I
practical
like that.
judgment.
A really smart intern. I like
Yeah.
that. I'm stealing
Forget
that
Aristotle's,
from
this practical wisdom, phronesis that he talked about. We can't lose sight of that. Anyway, Rick, thank you
So,
so much. Really,
thank
really
you,
appreciate your counsel and wisdom.
and I'd like to again to thank the audience who joined us live today, and a very warm thank you to you, Rick. It was educating, and it was a pleasure and an honor to have you here. Chuck, looks like you're the winner of this session as the most engaged attendees, certainly. So the book is on its way, and I want to thank you, Adam, again as always. I want to remind the audience that you will be able to find Cyber Sensei on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts, and as long as Google Podcast is there, you might be able to find it over there, and of course on our YouTube channel and on our website. And you're welcome to follow us on LinkedIn to receive more updates and to get updates about upcoming podcasts. And as always, you can reach out to Adam, Rick, or to myself on LinkedIn, and we're looking forward to seeing you on our next episode. Rick, thank you very, very much. It was a pleasure to have you.
It was a lot of fun, guys. Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
Thank you.